What else are you working on besides Sinphony?
Yeah, so I have several features now that I'm working on currently. I also have a couple more shorts that I've written that there may be another anthology that I've been invited to be a part of, but I don't know the specifics about that yet in terms of when that's going to be happening. But that's another really exciting one, and I really love
Mhm.
those two shorts, so it'd be really fun to get to do that.
Nice.
But mostly it's features. Some of them are animated and some of them are live action, because of my background.
Mhm.
Um, and I've just been writing up a storm, with the strikes going on, obviously, it's just the best time to create new IP,
Yeah, it's
in our little caves, just writing up a storm, developing stuff, so that once it ends, I can go full out.
yeah, so we're definitely going to go more into the IP and your background because there's some really interesting stuff there. As well as a very interesting discussion to be had around development in general because you and I have been through that road.
We have.
But before we do, I do since this is a podcast primarily for filmmakers, if somebody listening here intends to create an anthology, what would your advice be as somebody who participated in an unusually successful one?
So it's interesting. I've done a lot of research on this too.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, like in the time of Tales from the Crypt, or like Tales from the Dark Side, the
Mm-hmm.
movie, or like, Twilight Zone, they used to be prestige films, these anthologies
Mm-hmm.
that had like major stars in them, or like Cat's Eye, the Stephen King
Mm-hmm.
one. And like Tales from the Dark Side, the movie had all the top stars of the time, like in the film. You got
Mm-hmm.
Steve Buscemi, you got like all these guys in there. And what's happened now is that um anthologies have kind of been relegated to this like super indie, low budget, no stars territory. And I feel like, if I was putting one together and I had a proper budget for it, I would
Mm-hmm.
definitely get some faces in there. And I think that would make a difference on the distribution side, um especially if you do it strategically, or like, even like Trick or Treat, had
Mm-hmm.
some really well-known faces in it as well. um but now it's more like the VHS era, and like, which, I love the VHS
Mm-hmm.
um films. I think they're amazing. I think it allows filmmakers to experiment with horror and like do really interesting things. The Sewer Drain one in '94, the Ratma one, is probably one of my favorite ones ever. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also that cult one from VHS 2 that's like insane. Like they just do
Mm-hmm.
like insane things. Um, so, but that's become a brand, right? So they can release a VHS film and they pretty much know what they're going to make from it. Shutter kind of
Mm-hmm.
handles it to some extent, but they also have like a limited theatrical or whatever they do with it. Or at least a festival run.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it can be tricky. We ran into some problems, like domestically, we did really well
Mm-hmm.
with our anthology. Internationally, it was tougher. Some of the regions just, they weren't into a horror anthology, or at least not ours. Because once again, it didn't have like big names in it or anything like that. But mostly ours did well in terms of like the Halloween thing. I think helped a lot because it's like with Cobweb. Did you see that movie? It just came out recently.
No, I didn't.
Okay. It's the perfect, like from a creepy like Halloween standpoint, it's the
Mm-hmm.
perfect Halloween film. And it was released in like July or August. And it's like, this thing probably would have killed it at Halloween, just because people want to go watch a creepy movie for Halloween.
I mean,
But it happens.
yeah, the issue with the October releasing for Halloween films and horror films is just how saturated the market becomes and how basically
They
every
say that, Ben, but I'll tell you
yeah,
something. We wouldn't have gotten half the press we
I know.
got in a different time of year. We would have been a non-issue. But because it was Halloween when we were released, and like I said, they're like the top 11 films that you want to see, and it was
Mhm.
like next to the menu and all these other like major, like Pale Blue Eyes with
Mhm.
Christian Bale, like they were major films, and us, that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't Halloween, you know. So at
Fair
least for a
enough.
horror anthology, I'd say, and or if the anthology has to do with other like times of year, like different holidays or whatever, I would go all in on having it, because most headlines and most articles that they're doing, they're
Mhm.
topical for the time of year. So, and there's so many outlets now, so even
Yeah.
though it's saturated, I guess also you got to have a good PR firm as well, and like
That's a very
like a
good point. And
good
if
rep.
you're getting the sort of marquee placement that you're getting, you're right. It is absolutely not too saturated for your film in particular. The issue is just the massive amount of horror films that are released. It's easy to get lost in that.
The other thing we had was the story of the
Mhm.
origin of it on
It's true.
Clubhouse, and
Yeah.
that was a huge selling point where people wanted to know about that, and they
Mhm.
wanted to, and the whole Clubhouse thing was a new thing at that time.
Mhm.
And it's huge, like I have filmmaking friends and collaborators around the world now because of Clubhouse. That didn't exist before.
Oh.
I know more people in LA than I do in San Francisco, where I live now, because of Clubhouse, and just the access you get to these amazing people who are established, was incredible. And
Mhm.
Clubhouse doesn't really work like traditional social media platforms either, like on
Mhm.
Twitter, or I guess now X, and all these other ones. They try to get as many followers as possible, or however people do it. With Clubhouse, I've found that like you can do a lot more in a regular room of like 6 to 12 people. You can actually get, or I mean, first of all, we're just
Mhm.
great friends and we talk all the time, pretty much every day.
Mhm.
But like, and it's about building these relationships. It's not going in and being like, how can you help me with my career? Like that doesn't work. People get really turned off by that. Um, but if you actually get to know people, and then you're like, oh, you want to do something? Oh, what are you working on? Oh, okay. Do you need help? Or, oh, can you help me? And eventually people come to you, you go to them. But it's building these relationships that go pretty deep. I mean, when we saw each other for the first time in person in San Diego at Comic
Mhm.
Con, it was like a family reunion, because we had been talking to each other for like over a year, constantly. um and it was the first time, and what was crazy is, so we had, I think, 30 to 40 people show up at Comic-Con from that we knew from Clubhouse. And then, like I said, at the screening, it was like 80 to 100 people that we had met through Clubhouse, and it was one of the first time people were even meeting in person again, at that time. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, Clubhouse, at least in its heyday, was an extraordinarily powerful networking tool. And you're right, you had to be there from the perspective of, let me share knowledge, let me learn, let me be a part of this community, not how can this community help me further my goals. If you started with the latter on that, you were out super quickly. If you started with the intent to build the community, there was a gigantic opportunity there. I think that has waned in the past couple years, but
It's it's waned in the
yeah,
more broad general sense, but what's
yeah.
funny is like the communities that did form on there are
Mhm.
still meeting. They just have private rooms now. They're
Oh,
not like
entirely. I mean,
they're not the big open rooms, because it just gets so messy in those rooms sometimes. You have like
mhm.
people that are like scammers, you got people that are just, you know, liars. There's people that are trying to manipulate people and do weird stuff. So
So it's
after you
just like
run,
the standard film industry now. Whereas
yeah,
before it was actually building artistic communities. But no,
right.
no, I agree. And also a good number, I don't know offhand exactly how many, but a good number of people on this podcast I met on Clubhouse, and we developed relationships out of that. So it's a I think it used to be an amazing platform, and I just think the community involvement has shifted. But
Yeah,
the
I mean, there was a crossroads where I think like maybe it could have gone larger, but it
Mhm,
definitely ended up kind of like shrinking back down into a more intimate thing.
mhm.
And then, you know, Twitter's kind of got their own version of it now. I think Instagram has their own version of it.
I know
Um,
Spotify did for a little bit. Nobody else really got the traction that Clubhouse got, though. It
no,
was,
no.
yeah. They
And
all tried
also,
to copy it, and then it
yeah,
just really killed it because it decentralized the community.
yeah.
So,
And the quality from what I've heard, especially from some of my friends that are musicians, because musicians will use Clubhouse to just like jam
mhm,
and stuff, or you know, play music and people go and hang out. There's also
mhm.
rooms where people just go and meet up and they all write in silence in it,
Yeah,
so they're not even talking to each other, they're just there together working, and it's
accountability.
like they're called
Yeah.
writers sprints or something. Because there's also an amazing, like we have our filmmaking and horror sections of Clubhouse, but there's
Mhm,
also an amazing whole portion of it that are like novelists and
mhm,
writers on that end. A lot of them are led by our friend Mandy Roth, who's an amazing self-published, she's like a self-publishing machine that
mhm.
just pumps out so much work. Most of the time when we're talking to her, she's like working on like one or two novels. It's insane. She's a mass. Anytime we think we're doing a lot of work, we talk to Mandy, and then that gets us to get back to work immediately. She's just so
That's
prolific.
yeah, I understand. I mean, like, Yvette Vargas was on an earlier episode of this podcast, and she runs the New Hollywood rooms on Clubhouse still, and they're
Nice.
still kicking. They're like
Yeah. Yeah.
really good. So definitely check all of those out. If you guys haven't checked out Clubhouse, just because you missed the maybe golden age, we're still in a silver age. It's not a bad place to be. Um,
Yeah, I mean, one good room that still happens pretty regularly is one called Plot Points. I think it's usually on Tuesday nights. I think it might just be once a month now.
mhm.
But that one was started by my friend David McInerney,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's got like lit reps and like industry people in there talking about real stuff. A lot. The topic, a lot of the time now is the strike, you know, or the strikes, you know, and where everything's at with that. So if you want to find out about that stuff, that's a good one to check
yeah.
out.
No, so uh we'll at least put a couple of those links in the description down here. I don't know how many, but at least a few.
Cool. Yeah.
The